Hey, you all, it's fundraising time again at the Libertarian Institute. We try not to do this to you too often, but business is business after all. I got a great group of guys and a gal at the Institute, and I got to pay them. So just go to libertarianinstitute.org/donate to pick your price and help out. We've got some great kickbacks too, books and shirts. Great ones. That's libertarianinstitute.org/donate. And thank you all very much.
Welcome to the Libertarian Institute Odyssey and YouTube channel. Today we are doing another roundtable where my editor-in-chief, Sheldon Richman, and I will go back and forth with three of our favorite stories or topics that we've come across in the last week or so and try to summarize the important aspects of them. Sheldon, starting with where do the savings go from the American Institute for Economic Research? What do we have here?
Yeah, this is one of two that are sort of related that I'll talk about today. This was a very good article by Art Carden, a very good economist, who I've known for a long time and published in some of my past lives as an editor. And he's reminding us of the Henry Hazlitt and also Frederick Bastiat point, very important point if you want to understand how markets work and how liberty works, therefore. That as he puts it, the art of economics consists not merely in looking at the effects on the most visible groups, but in tracing the effects on everyone. So often when people propose some kind of government intervention, they'll say, but look, it's going to be good for, and then they'll name a specific group, and then they stop there. They both neglect how it affects everybody else, and also what effects occur after the immediate moment for the very, very short run. So the example he gives is when jobs at making, let's say, socks, he uses the example of socks, move to, well, the jobs don't move, of course, but the factories opened in the developing world start making socks because they can make them cheaper there because it's a lesser developed, less skilled workforce. Some Americans may lose their jobs. Some, let's say sock makers lose their jobs. And so the critic will say, well, come on, you'll save a few pennies on your socks, but that benefit hardly makes up for the great harm to the people that lost their jobs. And he goes on to trace out what happens when people save even a few pennies. If you aggregate that, you're talking about a lot of money, much of which gets saved, and that's the point of the title about what happens to savings. That money then is invested, it's borrowed and invested in new enterprises, which create new products, new jobs, so even if it doesn't directly benefit the people who were making socks earlier, it benefits so many other people, and eventually, in the slightly longer run, it really does benefit everybody, including the children of the people who were making socks. So trade is good. Trade is a double win, and we should not be worried about it. We shouldn't let the populists of the right or the left, because Trump and Bernie Sanders are kind of the same on this issue, that the government should be, quote, protecting American jobs by impeding free trade with the developing world.
My first one is from The Conscience of a Liberal by Paul Krugman on page 224. Krugman says, in 2004, government programs paid for 44% of healthcare in America, while private insurance paid for only 36%. Most of the rest was out-of-pocket spending, which exists elsewhere. The rest of the reason why the American system works so well as it does is that the great majority of Americans who do have private health insurance get it through their employers. This is partly the result of history. During World War II, companies weren't allowed to raise wages to compete for workers, so many offered health benefits instead. Now, if you listen to the Democrats today and even the Republicans, they'll admit that tying health insurance to work is a completely ridiculous notion. Car insurance be tied to work? No, it makes exit costs of leaving a bad job higher than they otherwise would be. Yet, it takes page 200 of a seldom known book by Krugman to get them to admit that it was first government intervention in the first place with Hoover and Roosevelt that got them to rely on things like health insurance for almost everything, as opposed to when you have car insurance, it's only for something catastrophic. Now with healthcare, because all the employers have gotten in on it, well, you go to a checkup and you have to show them insurance. One of the many examples, along with Medicare, Medicaid, the Food and Drug Administration, how government intervention has made us all worse off. And you'll notice that the more the state gets involved in things like healthcare, the more regulations there are, the less competition there is, the higher prices we have. Whereas in other things that are technologically based, like computers and televisions, we see much more of a decrease in their prices over time. And it's also important, his first line here, in 2004, so this is before George Bush's Medicare Part D, before the Affordable Care Act, government programs paid for 44% of healthcare in America. So it's not like there's been this laissez-faire, hands-off approach, and then eventually we need to start like getting the government involved and taking a stand here. You get the fake story that there was total freedom, and now we might need the state to step in. The state stepping in was the problem in the first place. Props to Paul Krugman for admitting that. Second story from Reason, How to Empower Millions of Independent Workers. Sheldon, what do we have?
This is an article by two people at Cato, Scott Lincecum, who's the director of economics and trade, and then a research associate there, Ilana Blumsack. And they make the great point that the government could do a lot to lighten the burden on independent workers. In other words, people who get 1099 income. They don't get a W-2. They don't work for a company. They may have different accounts and contracts and clients. They don't work for a single person. Their time is their own. They don't have a boss over their shoulder expecting them there from 9 to 5. And they make a very good case. They point out, and this was kind of news to me, although I hadn't thought about it too much, that most people who are these independent workers are not gig like Uber drivers, gig workers. In other words, with gig workers, it's not a contract basis. You're kind of just on demand, and that's fine. But that's only about, I think they say, about 8%. Most independent workers are just people who have, independent contracts with clients, and then do defined work, and they maybe have more than one contract at a time. And like I say, they get 1099 income. So they give a couple of steps, which you can see at the article, about how the IRS tax laws could not so much lower taxes on them. They don't call for like preferential tax treatment, but basically giving them sort of tax treatment that employees get. There's no standard business deduction for an independent worker, so they propose that they do that, which keeps the worker doesn't have to undergo all the paperwork of keeping track of every expense. He may just realize that the standard deduction is fine. Allowing him to have income tax withheld if he chooses, like workers have to have theirs withheld, and that saves some paperwork, quarterly payments, just a bunch of small things, not radical steps. But just since this is becoming a bigger and bigger thing all the time, there's no reason why the government should be burdening these independent workers. They should be free. California, on the other hand, is like really burden them. In fact, it constricts the definition of who even qualifies, and they want to make like Uber workers be regular employees and have to be saddled with all kinds of rules and regulations and benefits that they may not even want. So this is a very good article. If you're interested in this subject, I recommend it.
My next one is from one of my favorite philosophers, a guy at Georgetown University. He wrote this book titled Against Democracy, which he got published by Princeton, which I am very impressed with. Here is someone with very high credentials critiquing democracy. He says, the problem with political decisions isn't merely that most of us don't get our own way. It's also that these decisions are usually imposed on us against our will by threats of violence. Governments do not merely advise us to follow their rules, hoping that we'll comply out of the goodness of our hearts. They enforce their laws and rules with violence or threats of violence. Going on to say, democracy as we practice it is unjust. We expose innocent people to high degrees of risk because we put their fate in the hands of ignorant, misinformed, irrational, biased, and sometimes immoral decision makers. What I love about this book It's titled Against Democracy by Jason Brennan, is that we have someone with major credentials doing it with a Princeton publication backing him, finally getting to the root of something that we think is very obvious. For the same reason we wouldn't tolerate if the Catholic Church took a vote and decided to start taking a percentage of everyone's income, or if the Red Cross was implementing new regulations on everyone, and every time someone said, well, we don't appreciate that, the Red Cross said, well, you should go move to a land far, far away because we're claiming ownership over all the houses, even though no one has contracted with us. I think Against Democracy and just the pure logic that Jason Brennan brings to the table with those two quotes is vitally important. Third and final story for Sheldon: free trade is a human right. What do we have here?
Well, this is the second on this theme of trade. It's very important. Again, it reminds us of very basic things, but it's good to be reminded, even if you've been at this libertarian advocacy for quite a while. It's always useful to go back to basics and remind yourself. So this is by Lawrence Vance. It was at the Future Freedom Foundation website, and it's called "Free Trade is a Human Right." And he starts by noting that people will complain about the trade deficit with China by saying, we sent last year, I don't know what the number is, 90 billion, I'm kind of making it up, that may be close, $1 billion to China. This is terrible, this is intolerable, we got to do something about it. And so Vance reminds us of a few different things, or maybe in some cases teaches people something they didn't know. First of all, we don't simply send boatloads of money over gratuitously for the heck of it. We get goods. We buy things. Who talks about, you realize how much money I sent to my supermarket over last year? It's outrageous. It's obscene. Did they buy anything from me? Well, no, they didn't buy anything from me. But I brought home food every time and other stuff from the supermarket. It's the same thing. The other thing he points out is that China, countries don't trade. Certainly in the case of China and the United States, it's not the Chinese government trading with the American government. It's Chinese people, manufacturers and merchants, trading with American manufacturers and merchants, and they're trading things. The final thing that he goes on to debunk is this idea that there's a problem with the trade deficit. He quotes a famous line from Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations: "Nothing can be more absurd than the whole doctrine of the balance of trade." How often have you heard that these days? Not at all. Everybody thinks there's some problem with the trade deficit. And Vance doesn't go into too much depth about this, but I have over the years in many articles, and of course others have. It's a ridiculous idea because, for one thing, the trade deficit that people talk about only refers to one thing, and that's the merchandise deficit for goods. But if we buy goods and send money to foreigners, and the foreigners invest the money that they get here in real estate or invest in companies or the stock market, those show up in two different accounts. So you'll find an increase in the merchandise deficit because we brought in goods, but we didn't send out goods because of that. However, there's an offsetting surplus in the what's called the capital account because foreign investment came in, but there's no corresponding money going out as foreign investment. So it's bogus. It's bogus, as Adam Smith said. The whole doctrine is absurd.
My final story here from 2018, still relevant. Health Department in Missouri defends pouring bleach on food intended for homeless people. The Kansas City, Missouri Health Department is speaking out after it poured bleach on food intended to be given to homeless people. Nellie McCool, who helps run Free Hot Soups Kansas City, has been helping the homeless for years until Sunday. Officers and health inspectors demanded we destroy our food, and we were violating health code violations by sharing meals with our friends, said McCool. The department said the group wasn't following the law about serving the homeless. They were notified, he goes on to say, and then she says, well, no, they actually never told us. Here it is. According to the health department, the permit is free, and all organizations that want to serve food to homeless people or anyone needs this permit. Archer said the food was not being handled correctly and could put others at risk. This is Rex Archer, the head of the health department, saying, preparing food in all these individual homes when people haven't been trained, prepare food safely. Then they are taking it and transporting it in trunks of cars when it is cool. It's supposed to be warm food, but they have no insulation or way to keep it warm, Archer said. The mayor, Sly James, that's his actual name, came out and defended this. So they had many a time for moments of clarity, to which the mayor says, regarding the incident involving free hot soup and the Kansas City Health Department, rules are there to protect the public's health, and all groups must follow them, no exceptions. When asked about, did you really pour bleach on the food just so people wouldn't eat it? Rex Archer said standard procedure in public health is to go ahead and pour bleach on the food so that people won't consume something that is dangerous. This is the nature of what we are up against. These imperialists, both domestic and foreign, think they know what is so good for us. They will not just coercively impose it on us. They'll coercively impose it on the most vulnerable people in society. It's always thought of that licensing is just so Jeff Bezos, we're able to get back at Bezos and Bill Gates a little and make, business a little harder for them. Licensing and regulation hurt the poorest and most vulnerable people in town. So now you can look up this story and just type in, health department pours bleach on food, and you'll get stories out of every city where charities are constantly doing this. It actually happened in Phoenix. I found another one in Jacksonville, another one in New York. It happened with my friend Patrick Smith of the Voluntary Virtue in Dallas, Texas. Same thing happened in Washington, D.C. at a lemonade stand. This is what we're up against. This is why we ask people to check out libertarianinstitute.org. Help us out. Sheldon, tell us something that people can find. Like I said, it's drinking out of a fire hose going to our website. So if they go there, where can they look? What's something they could check out?
Well, actually, I haven't been the last couple of days, being sort of in the holiday spirit here. I've been doing other things, but there's always a variety. Just looking at it quickly today, there's articles by David Stockman on about home sales dropping, the articles about the Fed, articles about articles about foreign policy. We got that well covered. You can find almost any public issue that you're interested in on any given day at the Institute. So you really should check out libertarianinstitute.org.
Thanks to everyone for watching the YouTube and Odyssey Libertarian Institute channel. Sheldon, thanks so much for your time.
Great to see you. Happy New Year to everybody.